ever happens, just bear with me for a few minutes. I've just kicked myself out. Okay, the recording thing's coming up now. Brilliant. And it looks like my slides are being shared as well, so we're ready to carry on with this. Okay, where was? So we'd got to the project progress, and we talked about a number of ways which were quite standard things on a sort of low level, and then you'd give me some really good examples in terms of the cost of the project of various things as you're going along, the level of risks that have been reported and how they're or incidents and actually their severity, and sort of a higher level reporting. So we talked about that in terms of monitoring project progress. So the next thing is, how do we actually report on project outcomes? So when your projects are finished, what are the processes that you go through to report on what's on the outcomes?
From a Highways England perspective, depending on sort of what project it would be, to say if it was a research project or a trial or something, then there'd be a document from a consultant to sort of consolidate those findings. And then in terms of sort of passing that knowledge on, we complete a benefits knowledge capture form, which will sort of encapsulate all of the learning really that can be shared with the wider business sort of thing.
And how, so that sounds a really good process in terms of formalising it. How is it then shared? Because you're such a big organisation with so many different areas, aren't you? And, you know,
it's shared with the programme office. And then, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what happens after that.
That's what I was wondering, because it sounds like the right things, but how, you know, it's this sort of knowledge base that you're building. How on earth can you disseminate it to the right people for the right projects?
Yeah, I think it's always quite hard, especially in such a large organisation, and you know, it can be quite siloed on how you sort of make sure that, you know, another area of the business for you know, could be doing the same as well.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
I do like some of the, you know, the three-way reviews that you have with Joe. When I do them, I'm talking to people, I'm like, I'm sure I've heard someone else does that job, but they don't know each other and they're just in a different area, and you just like, there must be so much that could be transferred between people, but yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
I think that's where kind of knowledge management and knowledge transfer comes in.
Yeah.
So our business is just setting up a knowledge management system, because we have so many communities of practice across different disciplines, across different areas, and exactly that, the right arm never speaks to the left arm, and you're all off creating the same thing, and then somebody goes, oh, did you know so and so is doing that as well? And you haven't shared that knowledge. So we're trying to create a knowledge management system so that that happens and becomes part of the organisational culture, which I think is really important.
What would you do then? Would it be a system that you type in something and you're able to pull something down, or how you know, because something that complex, yeah.
That's where we're kind of at the very early stages. We understand the principles, we understand what we want to do and how we want it to look as an output, but it's understanding, because obviously you have lessons learned at the end of a project. And I know specifically in our industry, when we think of lessons learned, we think of things that have gone wrong and the lessons we've learned. We don't think about what went right and how we made it right. So we have all of these lessons learned logs at the end of a project that sit independent on a project and are never looked at again. So what we've tried to create with communities of practice is everyone within the business that is a structural engineer sits on this community of practice.
Okay.
And they can say, oh, we've done this bridge and this was how, and then somebody goes, oh, I've got a bridge similar to that. How has anybody worked on this? And we start to share that way. And that's kind of our early concept.
Okay.
And then we're unsure of how to then take that and then move it into a bit of a bigger system. But it is something that you get to the end of a project and go, great, move on to the next one, and you're doing exactly the same thing, but instead of taking knowledge from the project you've just done, you just start again from the beginning.
Yeah, which is how so Amelia's examples seem quite straightforward for sort of wrapping up lessons learned, that sort of thing. What happens with a sort of with a really massive projects? Have they got a different sort of format in terms of reporting the outcomes?
Not
or
really.
does that include them? Okay.
Probably just on a different level in terms of information. So if we are kind of project outcomes, there'll be a bit of a closed down meeting, a bit of a demo, depending on how big the project is. I mean, there's a project going on at the minute that's 12 years. So people might be on that project for 12 years and there'll be a demobilization at the end, which kind of goes through everything that's been done and all of those closeout documents. But I think you'll probably do the same amount of documents, but it'll just be on a different level.
Yeah. Okay. And is it similar for those inside and outside of Highways England? Are you all following the same processes because of the agreements you have in place?
We at Balfours have something called Project on a Page, which is used on major projects, big highway schemes, where essentially the managing director wants to look at one page and it wants to tell them all the critical sort of progress of the project. So milestones, are they being achieved, are they not? Is anything on track? What's falling behind? So there's a lot of work goes into it, and essentially it just ends up being a few graphs on one page.
That sounds really helpful, that does. Yeah, because I've heard a lot. I'm writing an entrepreneurship module at the moment, and we've got like a one-page business plan that sounds, so you sort of almost, just at a glance, you can just see, and that gives a sort of high-level visibility, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Okay, so other things that we could include in there. Do you have like presentations that are given then at the end of projects as well? Is there some sort of event, or does that ever happen? Or is it just these standard documents that are completed?
Yeah, we have like stage reviews, which is a presentation which happen at different stages of the project, whether it's just about getting the green light to go for construction or handover stages or project completion. There's a presentation process that happens then.
And yeah, so they're at the sort of, so they're like at the key milestones.
Yeah.
And then at the very end of it, is there anything particularly different that happens?
I guess it's kind of like the completion and handover stage. I mean, I'm on a project now where we're at handover stage, and I kind of keep a program of where we're at with all the necessary documents that are required for handover. Keep that up to date. But I mean, I think my construction manager does use that in presentations and stuff, but I'm not sure of anything specific.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any, do they have any celebration? You know, like, you know, in the teamwork where you've got the forming, norming, storming, performing, and there's this like adjourning to try and make it rhyme. Is there any of that? Is there any sort of celebrations when projects are done, or does that just sound silly?
I do on a small scale. So I haven't been on a major project that's come to a closure since I've been working in the industry. So I can't comment on kind of that major kind of level. But the projects I do internally, if it's a long duration of a project, there is always a kind of celebration and a close down meeting. Say, did we achieve our objectives? Have we fixed what we wanted to fix? And have we got in place the plan to recoup the benefits out the back of the project?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. And is there any sort of internal PR about the projects that have been successfully achieved?
It gets shared on. So the team I work in, we have an internal newsletter. It all goes on to Yammer as well, and things like that. So yeah, it's spoken about in a really positive light.
Good. Yeah, that's what I was just getting at. Just so that there feels like at least there's some sort of energized ending rather than just a bit of a nothingy, really.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we're looking at the end of it, talk me through the sorts of documents for the handover. Is the handover when it becomes business as usual then, rather than a project generally?
Well, I'm project based, you see. So as soon as I've finished a project, it'll probably be the same for a few people. You go straight on to the next project. So there's if you are like a support function or something like that, then I guess you wouldn't necessarily be as involved unless it was an internal project. But for us, it's handing over to the Highways England area team, which I know some people work for on this in this group. So we have to hand over things like as-built records, health and safety files, database updates. There's a long list of documents that have to be produced and reviewed and signed off and then handed over.
So you could summarise some of these in this section, the sorts of things. And actually, this only has to give a sample, like a bit of a sort of an overview, really, of the sort of process that it takes on to go, to sort of be handed over. So yeah, if you could do that, that would be really helpful. So just for this, we're talking about those documents that we've just been talked through by Henry in terms of like the handover, the sorts of things that Claire's spoken about in terms of really the sort of the sort of marking of it, really, and the sort of, I'm keen as well if there is any examples of any sort of internal PR that you've got of this, the sort of celebration there. And then also when Amelia was talking about sort of lessons learned and that sort of thing. So just have a think about your experience, if there's internal protocols that are followed for every, which it sounds like there are, almost like a series of templates. But also on this, you could even talk about, if you feel there's something missing that could be, because if it's almost like a project fatigue where it's just, well, it sounds like it is the nature of your job, isn't it? It's just on to the next. But is there anything that you feel is missing that could be done differently to at the end of the project? Or is there just not the space or the scope for it?
I think it's really hard in my area of work. There's a real push to sort of engage with operations before you even kick off a project. I know that sounds logical, but sometimes when you're going on to the next, one project might feed another and you haven't really thought about what next in the long term. So what are we actually doing with this? Have operations got the capacity or even, the appetite to take on this work as part of BAU? Like, how does that work in practice? And I think that is something that Highways England are looking to and need to sort of improve on. Thinking about, yes, this is great now. If it tells us what we want it to and what do the successes look like, what are we doing with that next kind of thing? Yeah.
And do you think, so when I talk to people in the sort of business as usual who take over the maintenance and running of things, sometimes they're quite critical of the project team, that they sort of hand it over too quickly when it's not properly. Is there a sort of a conflict there between the two?
I guess it's priorities. They're constantly conflicting, and whilst the work that SES may do, which is where we sit, is absolutely fantastic, and from us it's like we can't almost not do this because it's going to have X amount of safety improvements, and they're like, yes, but that doesn't align with our priorities or our budget that we've got, the resources that we've got available. And I guess it's how that aligns really, which is where not so much conflict, I guess, conflict arises where it's tricky to do that if we're not always on the same page because we're so big.
Yes, yeah. And also probably pressure to deliver something else as well, aren't you? In the sense, it's just on and on, isn't it? The amount of things. And the size as well, and the sort of siloed nature of it. Okay. So do you think you've got enough to, even if it's sort of hypothetically how it could be done, as well as like what you're finding out from talking to people, if you're not doing it directly, what is done? Are you going to be anybody really worried about what they're going to write here for? Take nothing as okay. So we're looking, so that was about reporting on what's come out of the project, and this ties in very closely in terms of actually the approaches. So I think it's going to be what we've just heard about, really, in terms of how projects are closed down. So the final stage in this process is this sort of close down period, which Henry, how many documents is it? Is it like hundreds, or is it sort of 20, or what is in this sort of package of everything that's required?
You've normally got to do the same amount of documents, but depending on the size of the project will relate to the size of the document, if you will. So if you're doing a database for, I don't know, pavements or something like that, so the asphalt, the tarmac, depending if it's a kilometre long or 20 kilometres long, you'll have to input that certain amount of data.
Mm-hmm. And does it take, is it sort of a, well, I suppose again it's the scope of the project, isn't it, on how long that will actually take to consolidate?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're on the green files, Henry. Do you do those?
Yeah, I'm doing green files now. Yeah. It's quite a small project, this, so I'm kind of doing. It's good, really. I'm getting a bit of an insight into everything as opposed to just doing one sort of section of it. So I'm helping designers with health and safety file and all sorts. So I'm getting a good insight to it all.
Is it more?
To give idea of scale, Hannah, the M4, which is 52 kilometres of motorway, we're looking at about 500 to 750 lever arch files that are effectively the handover information.
Yeah. And like, is it actually, is it?
The records really vary based on, like what Henry's saying, the discipline of what you're doing, but essentially it just consists of, the final testing information for whatever was built, as built records, any sort of quality inspections, safety records. It's just everything that passes over to the client that kind of headlines performance and delivery.
It's the nature of it's because of the nature of what you do as well, isn't it? The accountability, the public nature of it, the way it's funded, the governance, isn't it, that creates this need, I think.
It's seen as the most tedious stage of a project because normally by that point everyone's sort of moved on and moved around, so it sometimes takes months and months and months to get all the right answers. It can be a horrible stage.
Yeah.
Who just said yes to that as well?
Yeah, me, Henry, because I'm kind of doing it on my own at the minute.
I bet, I can just imagine it being quite a sort of isolating, almost quite demotivational. How much longer are you going to be working on it then for?
We targeted ourselves 3 months. We started sort of back end of Feb, so another month.
And you're relying on sign off from the client, aren't you? So you might you might just be going backwards and forwards a little bit to get everything kind of to standard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's constant reviews and constant revisions being needed to be made. It's not like write this document and then it's finished. It's a cycle of a process that can take a while. And if you haven't got evidence for something, then you can end up in a bit of a dark hole with it all. Trying to
feel your pain, Henry. Feel your pain.
Oh, so are you doing it as well then at the moment for the project you're on, Stephen?
No, I'm hoping to get out of it before it starts.
Wise move.
Yeah, it just shows, doesn't it? What so in terms of this, we just got to refer back to the project life cycle in the sense of actually it's this idea of we're coming to the concluding part of it, and actually as a result that sort of almost should feed into the next part of a different project. If when Claire's knowledge management system is working at its best, we'll all be able to be informed and have that communicated. So it's all captured, but it's this idea of each project going through a series of stages. And so did you call it the demobilisation, is it, or the end of? Because I was just talking to somebody yesterday about their work-based project, and they're going to be working on the mobilisation side of it. So is that really the initiation part?
In terms of like project specific, like operationally, your mobilisation is your setting up your compounds, getting your offices sorted, and doing things like stat searches for services, underground services, things like that.
So where would you say that fits into this initiation startup plan? Is it the planning and organisation, do you think, the mobilisation?
I'd say so, yeah.
Okay, and then is it called demobilisation, the final bit?
Yeah, there's kind of demobilisation is from an operational perspective is when you're kind of leaving the site, so you're getting rid of all the compounds, material storage areas and things like that, whereas handover is more, it's not really a site-based activity handover.
Is that like well beyond it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
would you say that bit where you're getting off site is the end of the implementation?
Yeah, because the work's been done.
Yeah.
The activities are complete by that point.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the things that are necessary around that. Okay. And then we've got sort of different activities obviously happen at different stages of it, which is where I was just talking to you about, like, where these different stages fit in with your and it obviously will depend on whether it's been handed over internally, whether you're a supplier but seen as a collaborator, or whatever the roles that you've got in these. So make this as specific as you can to the area that you're going to be focusing on. For those if you're not in a particular project area, just use a consistent sort of experience, if you like, throughout it, that you maybe have something to do with it, you can get access to the information. So I just think all these sort of processes, we really, in this one, we're focusing on the close down. So we're just focusing on this sort of formal acceptance. And did you say it requires quite a lot of sign off then as well from the from the customer?
Yeah.
And then if it's an internal project, how does that work as well? Is that just a different area signing it off, or where does that sign off come in there?
It'll just be whoever the customer is internally.
Okay. Yeah.
So we still have, if it's just internal, we'll still have a customer.
Yeah.
It might be a different business unit, but we still have that kind of, we have delivered, here is what we've delivered, that kind of handover piece, that implementation, and then they'll sign it off.
Is that the project closure report, or is that something else? Does such a thing exists?
So we do a project closure page. So very similar to Henry's, I think it was Henry's project on a page.
Yeah.
We'll have a closeout section that's got a signature from the project manager, the customer that says we've received all of the documents and we think this project has hit the objectives. And then it's also the customer then signing up to reaping the benefits that we've created with the new way of working.
Okay. And is there a review period after, when it's all done and then it's all settled, or is everyone just working on different things by then?
It depends. So if it's quite a new way of working, once we've handed it to the customer, we will still be very limited engagement in case of tweaks and things coming in once it's kind of scaled out wider. But it will be very limited. But if it's relatively small, we'll just hand it over and that's it, done, and we'll go on to the next project.
So, because there's a couple of your of other people that were on the first cohort that had done a massive lessons learned exercise to try and improve practices. Is that something that happens on some projects but not others, or is it a standard practice?
I think lessons learned is quite a standard practice.
Is it just the scale of it?
Yeah, major projects, for any kind of Highways England stuff, we have to do lessons learned. It's a mandated deliverable. Yep. But we're encouraged to do so, kind of our closeout documents along with the lessons learned and a case study.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's kind of how we close it out.
So for those of you that aren't sort of involved in projects on a day-to-day, are you able to access any of those sort of documents, the lessons learned, and sort of have a look at all the closure reports? Do you think you would be able to, somebody would share something with you? Is that commercially sensitive?
I'd have to ask. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. And if you got, do you know what? It might be that you have to talk hypothetically a little bit as to what best practice could look like if you're not able to access it. So we'll just have if you are struggling with stuff, we'll work out a way around this. Okay. So where we actually use facts and where we sort of fill in the blanks a bit with what could be done. Okay. So this sort of thing in terms of project closure, it's all things we just spoke about. So these were things that you were talking about as well a little bit before then, weren't we, when we were talking about in the learning outcome above. So we just need to make sure that the two are distinguished. So whether there's some sort of celebration, the post, the lessons learned documentation, the handover documentation, the sign-off processes, it's those sort of things that you'd be discussing in this section. So you've just gone end to end with a whole sort of sense of what's the processes that the project is going through. So yeah, so we're looking, so the outcomes of the project and the reporting of those are seen as quite different from the project closure in terms of, well, they're not, I know they're overlapping, but they're in terms of the project, in terms of this assessment, gosh, there's so many projects, aren't there? They are, you're sort of looking at what's being measured as you go along. That's A. What's measured at the end in terms of the outcomes and the project on a page. Now that sort of document sounded perfect for that. And then actually how you go about closing the project, which may be very similar, but actually at different scales depending on the complexity of the project. So that's everything for in terms of the learning for this module. So we've gone through the first two sessions, which we've covered all the material that's required. As I say, the next one, just let me know if you'd like some time to go through it. I'm very much available. And we've got the middle of May for the submission. So that's still quite a while away, actually, isn't it? It seems a long way off. Is it? Yeah, because we're only on the 1st of
April Fool's Day.
Yeah, we're on April Fool's Day. And actually, I did try and think of something, but I couldn't do it before. That was, yeah, not particularly funny, I don't think.
I thought the prank was us getting delisted from the university again.
Yeah, maybe it was. Maybe they they pulled it out of the bag for you, actually. Or not. So, yeah, oh, that makes sense. Sorry, I was thinking, how come the submission date's so late? Well, it's because in theory we've still got a session on way, so that makes perfect sense. So, question for you, right? We can, after each session, have something where we're looking at what to build in terms of evidence for these sort of knowledge, skills and behaviours. Is it useful to do it where we sort of have a 90-minute session where we just have some ideas about what can we add to our portfolio? Because you're going to need to build at least 20 items for your portfolio as you go along. And you've got your one-to-ones with Jo where she'll be talking to you about this and putting some sort of like trying to get you to move along and start thinking about it. Is it helpful in addition to that? Because I've done one with you. Or what do you think? Because I don't want to do stuff where you don't feel it adds any value, but actually I'm conscious you've got a lot to do with this course, haven't you? Not just assessments, it's sort of there's a lot of strands to it, aren't there?